All right, and it says we are live, so let's go ahead and just jump into it. This is Male Entrepreneur Podcast, episode number 123, and we are live in
So let's go
three.
ahead and just
jump into. All right, welcome back to the Male Entrepreneur with your host, the male entrepreneur himself, Purdeep Sangha. Purdeep, how you doing today, man?
Good, man. I guess I better be the male entrepreneur. I got the shirt on today. Actually, it reminds me of one of the chapters that I was writing in the book, and I think I told you this before, but it was funny when I first had these T-shirts made. There was a bunch of guys that were like, "Yeah, I want the T-shirt, but I don't know if I'd ever wear it because they don't want to get bashed by women." So it was it just reminded me because I was just writing that in one of the chapters of the upcoming book.
We live in a time where the people who have the most privilege also have the most against them in certain situations. Like they say, oh, we live in a patriarchy where males have privilege, but then you look at all the things that women are allowed to get away with and men aren't even allowed to stand up for themselves about. I remember when you were first starting this, you were like, I want to call it the Male Entrepreneur Podcast. And I was like, oh man, I can see us getting attacked for that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Sometimes you got to just stay on side.
Okay. So, you sent me the show notes for this episode, and it's actually something that I have been milling around in my brain, trying to figure out which way I want to go going forward. So it's a very pertinent topic for me. So I'm going to have a bunch of questions to get your feedback on. But to not keep the listeners in the dark anymore, what's this week's episode about?
Yeah, we're talking about masterminds, or you can say group coaching type of situations or scenarios versus individual coaching. And the reason why I bring this up is because over the last, this has been a hot topic actually over the last couple of weeks. Maybe it's just one of those themes where I've come across a number of CEOs and entrepreneurs that have been debating the two. So whether they should go into a high-level CEO mastermind or an entrepreneurial group, or do they reach out to someone that does individual coaching? So these are the things that I've been just in talking, because I used to run masterminds. I haven't done it since my dad passed. And I'm looking to do it again, probably in early of next year. But I enjoy both. Personally, as someone that kind of facilitates both, I love both of them. But we're basically going to be talking about the pros and cons of both sides, because they are two different environments, and you kind of get two different, you can say, not because both are very beneficial, but you get two types of experiences basically, which can be completely different.
So the reason that I wanted to talk to you about this is I am in the middle of creating a new training that I want to take people through, and it would work, I think, as a one-on-one coaching and consulting thing. I think it would also work as a group coaching or consulting thing. And so I think to talk about the pros and benefits, both for somebody who's deciding to lead versus somebody who's deciding whether I should join one or the other. I'd like to kind of pick your brain about that. I don't know where to start though. Where do you think is a good starting point for this conversation?
No, just shoot away. If you got a question, let's start with that.
Okay, so I've been in both and I've led both. I've done one-on-one coaching with people. I've done one-on-one consulting with people, and I've led masterminds, and I've also been coached by people individually, and I've also been part of group coaching as well. Personally, I prefer the one-on-one, but as far as time goes and being the provider, there's something really appealing about saying, you know what, everybody meets on Monday at 1:00, and I'm not going to do 8 different meetings with 8 different people going over the same thing 8 different times a week.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, honestly, so here's basically what spurred this, because a number of CEOs that we're talking about, they had the opportunity of being in these really high level masterminds, and some of them actually didn't feel comfortable. because they basically said a lot of these challenges, and this is kind of what I find, and this kind of relates to the episode that we talked about last time when it comes to the beliefs, the internal beliefs that hold us back. And these are a lot of personal challenges. These are a lot of personal issues. And sometimes people don't feel comfortable sharing them in the overall group. I personally love overall groups. I've been part of masterminds as well because you build those connections. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of having a mastermind is you build relationships. And a lot of times you can create some pretty good business relationships with these people and actually partner up. But on the flip side, here's my personal take on it. I enjoy doing both. I love both. But as someone who facilitates, I feel like the people that I work with on a one-to-one basis, I can get in deep with them. And so I can get in deep. I can pick their psyche. I can pick what's really holding them back, because it's a one-on-one setting, right? It's just two people having the conversation rather than having 8 or 10 people. My mindset as well is if you're going to host a mastermind, it should be a high-level mastermind. And for you out there listening, for example, if you're thinking of doing a mastermind and you take a look at the price point, it should be expensive. It should be expensive, unless you have a whole crap load of people in it, because the person that's hosting the mastermind, the quality, a lot of the times is determined by how much they charge. And I'm not going to say that's always the case, but I'll give you an example. It's not worth it for me to do a low ticket mastermind. I tried that in the past and tried to do it for the masses. It just doesn't have that same impact. So there's a certain threshold that I need to be charging people for in order for them to get in, so that they get the value. Because if you have 100 people in a particular mastermind, for example, how much value is each person going to get? Right? Versus a 10-person mastermind or a 12-person mastermind. I remember I joined a mastermind for a very, you can say, prominent, one of the top marketers in the world. And I think there was 40 people in this mastermind, and it just became too much. Mm-hmm. Like, and we could ask one question each, and it was just like, oh, okay. And then we had to pre-ask the questions prior to going in. And so a lot of this just became a process versus an actual conversation and actually working through things. So I just kind of said, it just wasn't worth it for me from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm. So for me, I've found the sweet spot to be even lower than that. I think 6 to 7 people is the max. Beyond that, it's hard to establish those connections. Mm-hmm. Beyond 6 or 7 people, in my experience. It's also hard to make it feel like it's worth it for everybody there being involved.
Yeah.
And the intimacy beyond 6 or 7 people in the groups that I've led, at least, it feels like when you get past 6 people don't. A lot of times, one of the magic things about masterminds is even if you're facilitating it, other people will say, oh man, I went through something similar to what Bob is going through, and let me tell Bob about what I went through. And then somebody else, they're like, oh, that just sparked an idea, and I remember this, and now I've got some suggestions too. And that's when the magic happens. And then sometimes Bob's problem that he's dealing with, you didn't even realize you were dealing with it, and now they're addressing Bob, and you're like, oh man, I'm getting a bunch of gold nuggets that I can apply to my own life or my own business. But it seems past 6 or 7 people, that magical component starts to fade away or starts to not exist anymore. So I'm with you on the 40, 50 people masterminds just being a complete waste of time. Maybe it's anecdotal. Maybe there's people out there that have gone to them and said, man, it was life-changing, and 100 people in a room was the best experience that I ever saw or had happen. But for me, even getting towards 10 people is too many people.
Yeah, you know what? If you take a look at a lot of the stuff, I'll just use Tony Robbins, for example. He has got 7-day events that he does. They're intense. They're like 12, 14, 16-hour days. You do get, and there's 2,500 people, sometimes 3,000 people in the room. But it's a completely different level of intensity. You can't do that all the time. Right. You can go to one of those once or twice a year or whatever it is, but you can't do that all the time. So I think the structure of the mastermind is very important as well. How often you meet, once a month or whatever that is. In this particular situation too, I think there's a little bit of a challenge because people aren't able to meet face to face. And we're seeing this because as much as people like to talk about technology and technology can replace this, honestly, it's a bunch of crap. Because sitting in a room in front of someone and having a conversation, reading the energy, and being able to go out for drinks or lunch or whatever it is with that group of people that you're with is a completely different vibe. You get to know people at a completely different level. I'm seeing this just in the consulting world right now, in the coaching world, that a lot of people are just, I've heard the term Zoom fatigue or whatever it is, that people are just getting tired of the online interactions. So I think there's the cool thing is, if someone's going to choose, because you and I have a unique take, because we hold masterminds, right? We coach people. And so for the listeners out there, you might be thinking, well, I've been thinking about doing like a mastermind, whether it's whatever it is. You could have specific types of masterminds, like a marketing mastermind. You can have an overall mastermind just for CEOs based on your role. You can have, there's masterminds for dads, for example. So it's really cool, the variety of masterminds that are out there. But remember as well, it's a time commitment. The other thing that stands out for me too is I see people coming into these masterminds with an intention to receive, which is the most important thing, right? You're trying to get value from it. But the other piece is that to have a mastermind work effectively, you have to give just as much. That's the whole point of the mastermind. It's a collective versus an individual. Individual coaching, yes, you want to receive, right? That's what you're there to do, is absorb during that entire period that you're working with your coach or advisor or whatever it is. But in a mastermind, you have to give, right? You can't just sit there mute and just listen to everything. You have to provide value as well.
I think that's what happens when you go past like 10 people, is people lose that incentive. They lose that motivation to give, because it's like, we've all got 3 seconds to give our advice. How much thought am I going to put into this? If there's 30 people in the room and everybody gets a minute, I'm not going to really worry about what I give, because he's got 29 other people to give him advice. So, but then the thing is all of those other 29 people have the same mindset, or maybe one or two of them are like, man, I've got some great advice about this. But yeah, man, I don't know, man. I don't think that it works past like 6, 7 people. It just loses some of that magic. I want to flip it around though. Personal one-on-one coaching. I personally, when it comes to like marketing and consulting, I feel like everybody's unique. Everybody's got their own circumstances. And I've tried to run programs where it was like, hey, we're going to start, it's a group of 15 people. We're going to run through, here's how you pick your target market. Here's how you identify certain aspects. Here's how you implement those aspects into your sales copy and into your marketing. Now we're going to do a landing page. Now we're going to do a lead magnet. I've tried to do that with people, but every group of people, even if I've tried to qualify them as much as possible, they're all at different stages. They're all at different points. And it just becomes a thing of trying to herd a bunch of cats. And so for that, I actually prefer not the mastermind. I actually prefer the one-on-one coaching. So in your experience, where is one-on-one coaching better than masterminds, or what instances should somebody go for a coach rather than trying to join a mastermind?
Yeah, if you really want to go deep, I think that's the thing. If you really want to go deep, because in masterminds, yes, you can shift, you can make a lot of progress. And I'll give you an example. I was working with one client, this was a couple of years ago, who was in a mastermind with a very high profile business person like this. And that mastermind was a significant amount. And actually, what he was paying was roughly about the same when it came to what he was paying me for my coaching and what this mastermind was. And he was meeting once every quarter with this mastermind and meeting once every 2 weeks with me. And I can tell you, he wasn't getting the work done in the mastermind group. And we were getting really deep into the one-on-one sessions. And what I find personally is when you're working one-to-one with someone, that's when it goes beyond it. You go into the core issues that are actually holding you back. And that's the biggest thing. In masterminds, I find that you can receive strategies. So you can get some really cool strategies. You can get some really like the playbook and stuff like that. But if you really want to get into what's holding you back, because again, from my personal experience, it's not necessarily the strategies or tactics that get people to success. That's one component. It's more the what is holding you back.
Mhm.
So it's not what's getting you there, it's what's actually holding you back from getting you there. And that's where the one-on-one comes into play. And if you can't uncover what's holding you back, which a lot of times you can't in masterminds, I'm not going to say you can't. That's a total generalization, total stereotype. A lot of times you might not have the ability to. You don't get into that deep conversation with the person facilitating or other people, that you can't uncover it to that same degree from the one-on-one perspective. Like I'm telling you, there's people that it's on. I feel bad sometimes, but there's guys, when I have a conversation with them, like they leave some sessions, and this kind of might seem scary for some of the listeners, but you could just tell like their world has been shocked. Like they've been just like sideswiped because they've just realized something that they've been living with for their entire life. And it, in a way, it's a good thing, but it makes them realize like, wow, they've been doing this that's been holding them back for such a long period of time.
I think also the vulnerability needed to have that type of experience is really hard to bring yourself to in a group. If you're in a group
Mm,
of 5 or 6 other very high achievers, and you go through and everybody talks about the wins that they've had over the last couple of weeks, and they talk about all the stuff that they're accomplishing, and they get on the phone, and there's the ice breaking part where we're like, oh yeah, me and Joan took the kids out to the park and we did this and this and this, and everybody's talking about how great things are, and then you need to be vulnerable so that you can have a breakthrough. You're like, do I really want to open myself up? Do I really want to express that my life isn't as great as everybody else just said that their life is?
mhm,
um in a personal one-on-one coaching, it's a lot easier to be vulnerable and to be open to having that experience. And I think that that's something that's one of the downsides of a mastermind, is it's really hard unless you have a long relationship with the other guys involved, or the other, in one of my masterminds we have females in it as well. um but unless you have a long relationship with those people and you've built a lot of trust that you can be open with them about things, you're just not going to have that same experience that you can with a one-on-one coach.
mhm. I agree. And that's why masterminds should at least be a minimum of a year if you're going to be in, and you get to build those relationships. And you're absolutely right. Vulnerability is where the growth happens, right? When you can put aside and you put your ego aside and say, hey, look, you know what, I really need to take a look at this. And a lot of high performing people, a lot of go-getters, for example, I find that they have a challenge with that. They have a challenge with that because it exposes them to something that they don't want to expose. And I honestly, I used to feel that same way too. And there's times where I catch myself where it's just like, oh yeah, you know what, I got to put that aside and I got to open up and I got to have these honest conversations and do that same crap that I do with the people that I coach. I got to do it for myself, right? But it's part of the change. And I get this quite a bit because I get a lot of guys that are hovering around, from the standpoint of they listen to my content, they read my blogs, they're there, they're commenting, but they're not really asking for help. And I've had some of these guys on the call, and I just basically said, you know what, I like just, because I do pro bono work I set aside a few hours every week, and I do pro bono work just to help people through. And I find that one of the biggest challenges, especially for men, is because they just don't want to feel vulnerable, right? Their biggest challenge in asking for help from me in particular is they feel like they'll be less of a man because they've opened up, that they've asked for help. And maybe some of the mistakes that they've made in the past, they're feeling ashamed of them, or they're feeling guilty. A lot of times guys feel like they should be at a certain standpoint or a certain level in their life at this particular age or whatever it is, but they haven't achieved that, or they've had a mistake in the past and that set them back. We all have this crap. I haven't met one successful person that hasn't made any major mistakes, whatever that might be. So we're just human at the end of the day, and I think that's where, whether it's mastermind or individual, I think that's where both come in. Nathan, I'm interested to know the masterminds that you've attended, or the ones that you've thought about attending. What was like the biggest attraction factor for you?
um I read It was because I read Napoleon Hill, the Think and Grow Rich book. And so I was like, wow, what are these masterminds? I want to know about them. Selfishly, it was just, I want to be able to succeed, and I want to be able to talk with people who can help me succeed. But I think at a deeper level, it was these ideas that I have, these things that are important to me.
Yeah.
Most people don't care about them. Self-development, success, business marketing, uh, how my brain ticks, um, how to become a better person. All of these things, most people in society just don't care about. Most people in society are like, hey, I've got to take the kids to soccer practice. I've got to get home and cook dinner and catch the newest episode of whatever I'm binge watching on Netflix. And then I got to go to bed and get up and do it all over again tomorrow. And they're just not interested in self development. They're just not interested in business development. And so for me, it was, hey, some people out there, there's a small group of people, or there's a small number of people that go bonkers for this stuff. Let's all meet once or twice a month and talk about this stuff and help build each other up. And so that was, I think the underlying thing was, I found some people that I can talk about stuff that I care about with, and they don't look at me like I'm crazy.
You're absolutely. That just reminds me, and that just brought up the conversation, the whole piece as to why it was. This is a topic is because some of the CEOs I was talking to brought up that same thing. They're like, I just need to talk to someone about this, and I don't have anybody to talk to because they can't go to their subordinates, for example, because you're supposed to be the leader. You're supposed to have all the answers, or you can't go to your board and talk to someone on your board because again you're supposed to be the one that's leading the ship. And so a lot of these people, and again, then we have do I talk to my peers? I don't want my peers to look at me like I'm any less as well. So that's the other thing, because one of the gentlemen said all of his peers in the industry are part of this one particular mastermind. It's a highest level mastermind in North America for this particular industry. But he said, I just don't want other people knowing my garbage, right? I don't want other people looking down on me because his organization is supposed to be one of the top ones out there. So how is he supposed to go in there and have conversations about the issues that they're facing and the challenges that they're facing, for example, when his competitors are in the same room and they're like, oh, these guys are going through some shit or whatever it is. So it's a really interesting take. It's a really interesting scenario. And I didn't realize this up until a couple of weeks ago, that some of these CEOs are feeling those challenges, right? They want to hold a lot of that stuff confidential as well. They don't want to talk about things like their trade secrets and their masterminds and stuff that come up. But that was a really good point, is people as a whole just need someone to talk to. Mm-hmm. And I think it's funny you mentioned that, because even in the coaching calls, I have a tough time, because when I meet with someone, typically they're 1 hour. They are based on a structure. We have an agenda and there's action items, right? We review the previous action items, make sure they're on track, because I want them to get the most value for it from this session, because they're paying me money for it. And I just don't, I have a real tough time when we just have a general conversation in these coaching sessions. Like, it bugs the F out of me, but sometimes people just need to talk, right? Sometimes they just need to let their challenges go, their issues go. And then sometimes I feel bad at the end of the day. And I had to stop myself from doing this, because after some of these calls, I would go back and hound them after. I would message them and email them and say, okay, so what were the action items? What is it that you really needed that you want to get out of this session, aside from just talking? Because I wanted them to have something practical coming out of this. And I had to stop myself. I said, I can't do that, because these sessions are about them, right? These sessions are about what they need in that particular time, not necessarily me. I want them to have progress, but it's on their basically schedule. I'm there to hold them accountable to a certain degree. I'm there to, guide them along the way and even create some momentum for them. But ultimately, it's what they need. It's what they're looking for, which kind of reminds me of one other point too, is the accountability. I didn't realize how many people are looking for an accountability coach more than just strategies and tactics, someone to talk to and someone to hold them accountable. Do you find the same thing?
Yeah, and I find also, just a weird side note, some of the biggest aha moments come from the off script. When we kind of go, I'm like, I got this agenda and we're going to go through this point, and this point. But sometimes the conversations where we kind of tread off of the beaten path, that's where the biggest breakthroughs happen. So it's hard to know where the value is going to come from.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think just to sum it up overall for this episode is that there's value in both. There's value in masterminds. You get the collective group, you get to meet some really cool people, you can build long-term partnerships and friendships. I've had some great friendships from some of these masterminds, and you get to learn what other industries are doing. If you're part of a mastermind that has a variety, that's probably one of the coolest things because you get so many different perspectives. On the flip side, the individual piece is it's confidential, it's deep, right? You really go just straight to the core, and you do get a different set of value from it. I think on both, be prepared. If you're looking for both, be prepared to actually pay, because you're going to pay for value ultimately at the end of the day. But the whole thing is to think of this as an investment. It's always an investment. So I would highly recommend you take a look and talk to the people that have gone through those masterminds as well. Get some referrals, call people up, see what they think.
All right, Purdeep. A lot to think about that we've kind of gone over in this episode. If people want to check out more episodes of the podcast, what's the best place to find you?
Yeah, you check out youtubeformen.com or malepodcast.com.
Screeching feminism intensifies. All right, man. Until next time, we'll catch you later.
Yeah, awesome, man.
Right.